Hello, and welcome to Conflict Resolution Contentment in the Classroom. This is week 9. During week 9, I want to talk about ideas on forgiveness. First off, why talk about forgiveness? And then talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened in South Africa. Then look at the 5 stages of forgiveness. And then look at some quotes on forgiveness. So, why talk about forgiveness? In the workplace, when you have a conflict with somebody, there's going to be some sort of hurt feelings that happen between you and another individual. Now, even when you have a conflict with somebody and you've worked out some issues to resolve it, some of those hurt feelings are going to kind of stay behind. And sometimes when you see that person, there's going to be that pit in your stomach that you're going to have. And every time you see them, you're going to kind of remember the hurt feelings that happen. So one way of getting rid of those hurt feelings is by forgiving them. Now, I'm not talking about the forgiveness where it's a quick, oh, I forgive you, or I'm sorry for what happened. This is truly a process of going through an idea of identifying what that person's done and forgiving them. And we'll go into that in the next couple of slides. But I think one of the reasons why we need to talk about forgiveness is we will always hold on to that hurt feelings. If we don't have a way of letting those go, they can hurt still in a physical or mental way. So that's the first reason why I think forgiveness is important. And then also when you have a conflict with somebody, there is a loss of something. There's almost a death of something that happens with you. And that could be a loss of respect. There could be a loss of control when you have a conflict with somebody else, or maybe a loss of self-esteem. And there are many other losses that can happen during a conflict. These are just some examples I'd like to give. And one of the reasons why I want to talk about losses in conflict resolution is because that we will go through stages when we lose respect in ourselves, or we lose control, or we lose some sort of self-esteem when we have another conflict with another individual. And I think we need to look at the 5 stages of loss and grief. And the reason why is when we lose respect or something in ourselves when we have a conflict with another person, we kind of go through these stages. So when we have a conflict with somebody and we've lost something, we first go through that denial stage where we really deny the fact that that person has taken some of our self-esteem away from us. Now, the second phase is we'll go through some sort of anger phase because we start to realize that that person has caused a loss of us or some sort of hurt with us, and it angers us that we realize that some of our self-esteem is lost. We even might go through a bargaining phase where if we do something to somebody or we do something that will somehow get that self-esteem. Maybe some people will go out and try to hurt that individual thinking that will help cause them to regain their losses that they've had during that conflict. And then we go through a depression phase because we realize that loss of self-esteem or that loss of control that we've had during that conflict. We realize that that's what happened to us when we go through this depression phase. And the last phase of losing something in that conflict is accepting it, realizing that, yes, I have lost some sort of control or some sort of self-esteem issue. And when we can learn to accept it, that it's happened, then we can learn to forgive another individual from taking that away from us And we can use the power of forgiveness to gain that self-esteem or that control back into our lives so we can kind of move on from the conflict. And that's why I think that forgiveness is such a powerful tool, especially in conflict resolution, because I feel that it's the last stage in conflict resolution. So you've learned to resolve your conflict with another individual. But because of hurt feelings or the loss of some sort of respect, control, or something that you lose during that conflict, if you don't forgive and move on from that pit in your stomach or those feelings, or you'll never be able to have that self-esteem issue back in your lives until you learn to forgive that person for what has happened during that conflict and move on from it. So I want to look into one of the most powerful acts of forgiveness that's happened over the last years in South Africa. And that is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, I want to back up a little bit to give you a little bit of history if you don't know kind of what happened in South Africa and why the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came about. So, in 1948, the National Party, which is the governance of South Africa, decided on a policy called apartheid. And apartheid means a apartness of races. And they put a policy in of racial segregation and political and economic discriminations against European groups in South Africa. So they put a segregation between blacks and whites in South Africa. And they put policies into place that were crimes against this state. So, for example, if they had a policy that had a whites-only drinking fountain and a black-only drinking fountain, if a black person were to drink in that white-only drinking fountain, then it's a crime against the state that they could be punished by the law and put into jail for drinking out of that water fountain. And there were other policies that were put in place that blacks were not allowed to be in certain parts of towns or certain houses during certain times. And these policies were put into place that they could prosecute them by law. Now, these policies lasted for over 40 years, and they caused tremendous human rights issues. Blacks were financially persecuted in South Africa. There were also murders that happened during that time. Now, in 1994, Nelson Mandela was released from prison and became president of South Africa. And he established an idea called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1995. This was a court-like body established by the new South African government to help heal the country and bring some sort of reconciliation to its people by uncovering the truth about human rights violations that occurred during the period of apartheid. It was emphasized was on gathering evidence and uncovering information from both victims and perpetrators. They used the powerfulness of forgiveness to try to heal their countries from the crimes that were committed during the apartheid era. An example of a case that happened in South Africa would be if somebody from the National Party committed a crime during the apartheid era. They would go to court and give information and truth about what they've done to family members during the apartheid time. They would bring in those family members and let the person that committed those crimes tell the stories about what happened to the individual during their part-time. I have heard some of these stories, and some of these stories are heart-wrenching to hear. But once the person told the information, they would get amnesty against the law. And one of the reasons why they did this is so many families were asking questions about why and how people could do this against their nation. And I think that once the people understood what happened, they were able to figure out a healing process for themselves. And I also think that this process also helped the people that committed the crimes because they were able to get out what they did during those times. Now, if you agree with the Truth and Reconciliation or don't agree with the Truth and Reconciliation, because I know that's a hard concept to understand, but one of the powerful things that I've noticed when I watch some of these videos on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is the fact that there is powerful in forgiveness, of letting go the hurt from that individual and taking back some of that power that person had from you for so many years. So let's look at stages of how to forgive somebody. And I know that the Truth and Reconciliation is a bigger entity from workplace forgiveness, but I wanted to emphasize just the power of forgiveness that can happen in a country that had so many race issues over so many years. So let's move on and look at the 5 stages of forgiveness. So in looking at the 5 stages of forgiveness, the first phase is to identify the hurt. What has that person done to hurt you in that conflict? Now, it's really easy to diminish what that person's done for you. But what we need to do is sit down and try to figure out what exactly that person did to cause you some sort of harm. Don't try to generalize the hurt, but try to be specific on what the hurt has done. What loss have you had in the process of this conflict? The second phase is to confront the individual. Now, this is a very difficult process, is to go to somebody and talk about what they've done to hurt you. Because you can have the ability for them to re-hurt you by lowering what you've had to identify the hurt is, or making it look insignificant. But in this phase, I think it's important to confront that person because they may not understand how they've hurt you. We know that in conflict resolution that people have caused conflict with other individuals without even knowing it. We've seen the ideas that once a behavior act happens, the other person may not understand that that behavior act has hurt you. So I think that people need to confront that individual that has hurt them. Now, if in forgiveness, maybe the person has passed on and are no longer with us, or somebody is impossible to meet up with. Maybe they've moved to a different country. Different situations happen where you cannot meet up with that person. It would be a good idea to write it down. Make a letter as that you're writing to them. It's not the matter of fact that you send the letter or they receive it, but you write it down so you get that information out. And then the third phase is the dialogue to understand. When you confront that person, one of the biggest things that you want to do is to ask why. Because I think that one of the biggest issues with having somebody forgive you or you forgive them is to understand why somebody hurt you. I think our brains are kind of wired to always ask that question, why? And I think in a lot of situations it will help us. And this is something that I think is a bigger issue in conflict, is asking somebody why they did something, why they hurt you. Maybe they don't even understand that they did hurt you. But there needs to be a dialogue to understand how the conflict has hurt you with that individual. Now, phase 4 in this is forgiving them. Now, this is not a simple act of I forgive them and you move on. But it's truly forgiving them for what they have done. Making an act in your mind and your body, giving that person the forgiveness that they need, but also the forgiveness that you need. And this last phase is probably the most difficult, and that is letting go from it. Once you forgive them, don't hold on to it. It can create a pit in your stomach, so you truly haven't forgiven that person. You need to learn to let those feelings out. Gain that confidence of control back. Gain that confidence of self-esteem back. And the only way to do this is let go of that hurt from that other individual. So let's look at some quotes that I think are kind of important that can highlight the idea of forgiveness. So the first one, always forgive your enemies. Nothing annoys them so much. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that prisoner was you. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribution of the strong. And I think that's a really powerful quote, is that the idea of forgiveness is not weakness, but that it's a powerful tool that somebody can use. You will never know that forgiveness has begun when you recall those who hurt you and feel the power to wish them well. Forgiveness does not change the past, but it does enlarge the future. The idea in this quote is that it's not going to change the idea of what happened in that conflict, but what it's going to do is change the possibilities of future conflicts being more positive. Without forgiveness, there is no future. This is from Desmond Tutu, which is one of the leaders in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Forgiveness is not an occasional act, it's a permanent attitude. This goes back to the idea that I talked about earlier, is that letting go. We don't casually forgive somebody, we forgive them and move on from it. Everyone says that forgiveness is a lovely idea until he has something to forgive. And this is something that's important to realize, that forgiveness is not easy. This is probably one of my favorite quotes. And this is from Nelson Mandela. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. I just think it's an amazing quote, that the fact that we allow our enemies in our head and we allow them to hurt us on a daily basis. It's not until we let those feelings go that our enemies can go away. And I couldn't find the author to this, but this was a student that told me about this, and I think this is a really important quote. Holding a grudge is allowing someone to live rent-free in your head. This idea of reliving over and over and over again that the hurt that this person's caused you. I think it's important to realize that don't let that person live in your head anymore. learn to forgive that person and move on. Just the powerful of forgiveness, I think, is a really big idea in conflict resolution. You have contentment in your classrooms and also maybe in your life. Hopefully these conflict resolution skills you can lead on and teach students on being able to learn on how to resolve their own conflicts, and then helpfully have you be able to help deal with some of the conflicts in your life. Thank you and good luck.